If this is your first time with us, just to kind of catch you up with what's been going on, we've been really reflecting on these words that Paul gives his son in the faith, Timothy, in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 17 and 18. There's some powerful words. This is what Paul tells Timothy he ought to do, how he ought to teach the people in the churches that he's responsible for. It says this: teach those who are rich in this world not to be proud and not to trust in their money, which is so unreliable. Their trust should be in God, who richly gives us all we need for our enjoyment. Tell them to use their money to do good. They should, would you guys say this word with me? Be rich on the count of three. 1, 2, 3. Be rich in good works and generous to those in need, always being ready to share with others. And so this series, really, this conversation in the month of November is really a training for all of us, a reminder for all of us of what it really means to be a people who are rich. That more important than what's in our bank account, how we leverage what God has given us with our time and our talent and our energy and our resources. This is actually what a true life of blessing, what a rich life looks like. And so be rich is really around three things: give, serve, and love. The first week we learned this, that when we are reminded of God's grace, we give generously. That remembering how good God has been to us is what releases us to be generous with what we have, whether or not that be our time or our resources. And then last week, Jen did an incredible job of teaching us this, that when we are reminded of Jesus' humility, that's when we serve sacrificially. And so the goal of Be Rich really has been this, that we want to give, serve, and love. And in that give component, the challenge that we really brought to you about 2 weekends ago was, what if everyone in our church, 100% participation, what if everyone in our church simply collected our resources together? We all went in at $40 an adult. What could we do if we raised those funds and immediately released 100% of those resources back into our community? Not $1 would remain with us, but all of it would go out and make a difference in our community. And if you're with us last week, we got to celebrate some of our community partners who we have engaged with. And we challenge you to say, if we did this together, we'd be able to adopt Lake Nona High School and the outreach that's going on there through Crew. That we could renovate a teen center at the South Orlando YMCA, one of the most under-resourced and poor parts of our city. And that we could feed 1,000 people through our giving, through Second Harvest Food Bank. And in one day, you took that challenge. And over the course of a week, this is what happened. You gave, get ready for this, $33,974.08, which is incredible. It's incredible because if I'm honest with you, we do not have enough projects to be able to release all of those funds immediately, because you went above and beyond what we anticipated or what we could have even imagined for this being our first year. And so if you're new with us, just a reminder, none of these dollars remain with our church. 100% of these resources are going to be unleashed into our community with partners who are doing great work that we believe is so valuable and so important. And because of your generosity, not only have we been able to do the things that I just talked about, but we've also been able to make sure that every single child who's at Nemours Hospital, who's going to have to be there over Christmas and cannot go home, is going to get a Grayson Project gift bag, which allows them to really decorate and experience their hospital room as a place where they can celebrate Christmas. If there's an opportunity for us to be able to give resources to charity cars. You know how we mentioned those two fellows who needed cars? They had a job opportunity in front of them, but the job was contingent upon them being able to have reliable transportation, and how that was one of our opportunities. Well, this is how cool God is. We kind of initiated that conversation. Another organization who gives cars away heard about it, and when those guys graduated from Jobs Partnership on Tuesday, they received keys to brand new vehicles, and it cost you absolutely nothing. Is that not incredible how God works things out? It's a crazy, 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 crazy thing. And so it's been so amazing to see what God has done. The Nona Hood News has picked up this piece, and there's going to be a print article in the December piece in our local news about what God is doing through you and through your generosity. And I'll just be honest, the resources that you have given us and that you have trusted us with to release into our city, we are just beginning to make a difference. I'll tell you this, you are not going to want to miss next week, because RJ from the Central Florida Children's Home is going to be here, and we are going to show a level of extravagant generosity that you are not going to want to miss, and we are just getting started. This is the heart of Be Rich. The heart of Be Rich is, what if we collectively put our money where our mouth is? What if we give, serve, and love? That people who do not believe what we believe would have to reconsider what they believe because of the extravagant love that they experience as a result of the local church. And because of your generosity, lives are being changed in our city in the matter of just 1 week. But what we want you to know is that generosity is not just about money. Generosity is not just about money. It is about something far more valuable. It is about something that you cannot touch necessarily, but you know that it's there when it is there. And so I want to ask you this question this morning as we get started and we kind of wrap up our series and we talk about the nature of love. I want to ask you this question. How would someone know that you are a follower of Jesus? How would someone know that you are a follower of Jesus? Well, for me, growing up, that was really marked by kind of 2 words, should and should not. Anybody kind of grew up in that kind of religious background, the shoulds and the should nots? I remember when I was in high school, everyone knew that I was a follower of Jesus because there were things that I would not do. I wouldn't go to that particular place. I wouldn't hang out with those particular people. I remember one of my friends one day, we're sitting at the lunch table, and these were my friends. We were cool. We had a great relationship at school, and they started talking about this awesome party that was coming up on Friday night. And a buddy of mine was like, man, you've got to come out. It's going to be a really good time. And this guy jumped into the middle of the conversation, and he said, oh, no. Collin can't come to that. He's a Christian. And I remember being so outed in that moment that my friends really did believe that the version of Christianity that I had, and to be honest with you, probably the version of Christianity that I believed in that moment, was that Christianity and following Jesus was marked by all of the things you should not do and the things that you should do, the ought to do list and the ought not do list, right? You don't talk, or you don't, what is it? You don't lie or chew or something like that, right? You don't cuss or chew or associate with people who do. I didn't grow up in the South. That was a softball to y'all who grew up in the South, right? Like I didn't grow up with that piece. But that was the kind of sensibility that I had about faith. And maybe you're in this room today. Maybe you're kind of here because of Thanksgiving and, your family invited you to come and they told you that if you don't come to this, particular gathering for an hour, you're not going to get any food for the rest of the day. Maybe you're just kind of paying penance, for whatever it is. But here's what I want you to know. If this is the version of Christianity you grew up with, that Christianity is really defined and followers of Jesus are defined by the things that they do and do not do, I want to let you know that is not the Christian faith. In fact, let's just mess around with some of these shoulds and shouldn'ts for a moment. Do you know why you should be generous with your money? Do you know why you should be generous with your money? Maybe you grew up like me, and the reason why you were taught that you should be generous with your money is if you give God $1, he'll give you 10 back. Anybody heard that one before? Well, here's the thing. If you live in America, you already got your 10, all right? It doesn't work that way. Well, why should we be generous with our time? Well, we've got to do good things because the more good things that we do, the more that God owes us. Maybe that's what we were taught, or maybe that's what we believe. Why should you treat someone with kindness? Well, because you don't want God to be angry with you. There's things that Christians do and things that Christians don't do, and this is all about what the faith is about. But here's the thing, right? If we're honest with these questions, why should I be generous with my money? Why should I be generous with my time? Why should I treat someone with kindness? For many of us, if the reasons why we should do that is tied to fear, or because of the law, or because of rules and regulations, how many of us know we're trying as much as possible to find the loophole around that, right? I mean, the question is, okay, if I have to be generous with my money, how generous do I have to be, right? If I have to be generous with my time, what's the bare minimum that I need to put in? If I need to be kind to someone, what is the least amount of kind I need to be to them? These are the questions that we ask. Let me ask you this. Do you know why you shouldn't? Do you know why you shouldn't lie to someone? Is it because of Revelation that says, there's this song that I grew up with in Sunday school, goes, liars, liars, go to hell, liars, liars, burn, burn, burn. That's how the song goes. Is that why we should teach our kids not to lie? Do you know why you shouldn't gossip about someone? Is it just because there's a verse in the Bible that says thou shalt not gossip or use malicious talk? Is that really the compelling reason because a book that was written thousands of years ago tells us to do that? Is that the reason why? Do you know why you shouldn't, young men, pressure or young women pressure someone sexually? Is it simply because there's a line and God does not want you to have fun and he wants you to make sure that, you only have, sex in marriage because that's the only version of fun sex, and then most people that have had sex outside of marriage say, I don't know if I buy that, right? Is that the reason why? Because of a book that tells us to do that? Is that the compelling reason? Here's the thing. There might be some validity to that, but here's the reality. In all of those situations, if our life is predicated off of what we should or should not do, if it's all predicated off of following rules and regulations, if it's all about following the law, all of us are looking for the loophole, aren't we? That's why when it comes to our sexuality, we ask the question, how far is too far? We just want to know what the line is so we can get away with whatever we want to get away with. It's why we struggle so much to not gossip, not because we don't know that we should, but because, let's be honest, sometimes it's way more fun than not doing it, right? There are these things inside of us that if we're honest, if it's about rules and regulations, it's about shoulds and should nots, we will spend our life finding loopholes. In fact, one of the reasons why there are so many laws written in the Old Testament is because of everybody trying to find loopholes. That what God actually intended to be very, very simple but hard became very, very complex and difficult because of our desire to find loopholes. Can we admit that we like loopholes? Right? Like when we get to tax season, are we not doing our absolute best in that moment to say, what is the bare minimum I have to give? Or in our relationships, what is the bare minimum I have to do to keep this thing calm at home or the people around me? And I think what's going to be interesting today, and I'm going to be honest with you, I'm going to bust some of our categories. Some of us are going to feel really uncomfortable with what we're going to talk about in the next few moments, because what we're going to find out today is if the marker by which our faith is determined by what we should or should not do, we have actually missed the way of Jesus completely. Because here's what we'll learn, is that following Jesus is not about keeping a list of rules. Following Jesus is not about keeping a list of rules. It's actually way harder than that. Because following Jesus is about love. Should you write that down in your notes? Following Jesus is not about a list of do's and don'ts. Following Jesus is far harder than that. It is about breaking through those loopholes and asking different questions and having different concerns and whether or not I'm doing too much or doing too little or going too far or not going far enough. It's about love. In fact, I would submit it to you this way, that following Jesus is about experiencing and extending his love to a hurting world. More than making mistakes or not making mistakes. More than doing the right thing, not doing the right thing. At the heart of the Christian faith. At the heart of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And what is so distinct and different than any other religion that exists. At the heart of our faith is an irrational, indescribable, difficult to comprehend, almost makes you feel crazy kind of love. So Jesus, in John chapter 13, has just finished having a great meal with his friends. There's wine around the table. There's really good food and drink. They've enjoyed good conversation. They've laughed together. They've cried together. Jesus has actually put a towel on around his waist, and he's walked from each of his followers, each of his close friends who he calls the disciples, and he's gotten on his knees and he's washed their feet. And that is like the job of the poorest of the poor. It's the slave's responsibility. It's the loser in the home's responsibility. It's the lowest person's responsibility. responsibility to wash the feet of those that are at the house, because I don't know if you know about this, but in the first century, they didn't have like really nice shoes. They didn't have boots or, nice sneakers. They all wore sandals. You ever heard the phrase Jesus sandals? That was just everybody's sandals back in the day. That's what they had. And there was no plumbing, so all of the fecal matter and the nastiness of the day, whether it be the horses or humans, just laid out on the road, and the dust would pick it all up, and people would walk through it almost basically barefoot, and all of that crud and nastiness would get on people's feet, and they would walk into a house. And it would be the servant's responsibility, the lowest of the low, the youngest child, perhaps the actual slave that was in the home, to walk around and wash the feet of every single person that was there. And Jesus, who in just a couple of chapters later is going to go to a cross and be murdered for crimes he did not commit, who's eventually in 3 days going to defeat death and create an opportunity for all of us to be in a right relationship with the creator of the universe. That very person, God with skin on, walks around the table and he washes the feet of all of his followers. He'll wash the feet of a guy named Judas, who's already sold him out for 30 coins. And Jesus knows, and he'll get on his knees, and he'll serve the man who's about to betray him. And it's in this context, and it's in this moment, when Jesus knows that his last breaths are in front of him and that life is going to get really hard, really quick for him, that he inserts these two little phrases, these two little verses. And in these words, he blows open the construct of what it means to love God and to love people and to be a follower of his. And he says this in John chapter 13. He looks at his disciples after he's cleaned their feet, and he says this: A new command I give you. And that word new is the Greek word kainos, which means fresh and unique. It is brand new. It has never been seen before. It is fresh. It says, a new command I give you. Love one another. Now, if you're a follower of Jesus in this moment, you're kind of expecting something a little bit different, because this is not a new command. In fact, Jesus has been saying love one another forever. There's a group of rich, smart lawyers who come to Jesus in Matthew chapter 22. They want to trick Jesus into figuring out what he's about. And they say, what are the most important law? What's the most essential thing to please God? And Jesus says this in Matthew chapter 22, 37 and 39. He says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This was Old Testament. This is what they all knew. This was law. This is what they expected. This is the first and greatest commandment. Then Jesus tacks something on. He tacks something on to this commandment that has never been heard before. He says, and the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. And if you were in the crowd, there would have been some oohs and some ahs and oh no, he didn't. I mean, that's what would have been happening. Because Jesus all of a sudden was doing something in that moment in Matthew that had never been done before among the Jewish people. Is that he was saying that to love God, hear this is massive, that to love God was as valuable and as important as loving people. That to love God, this vertical relationship, was just as important as the horizontal one. And that these horizontal relationships was just as important as the vertical one. In fact, he goes so far to say this in verse 40, that all of the law and the prophets. You know that Old Testament, you kind of, when you're in a reading plan, if you're in a reading plan, you kind of get to, and you're like, let's go to the Psalms today, or let's go to Luke. I like Luke. Anybody done that before? You kind of get to this point in your reading plan, and you're like, I don't know what to do with Lamentations or Leviticus. There are a lot of rules in here. I don't get them, so we're going to just pretend like we read this today. Anybody? Just me? Okay, I'm your pastor. Okay, so here's what he's saying. All the law and the prophets, meaning everything. Not some of it. Like, listen, not some of it. Everything from Genesis until the end. It all hangs on these two things. Love God. Love people. Love people. Love God. It's where we get the golden rule. You guys know the golden rule, right? Treat others the way you would want to be treated. This was the framework. This was scandalous in the first century. This idea that we ought to love the Samaritan, the outsider, the way that we would want to be treated. That we ought to treat women the way that we would want to be treated. That we ought to treat the poor the way that we would want to be treated. But when Jesus, remember, when Jesus says, a new commandment I give you, love one another, there is nothing about that to the disciples that is new. So they're sitting back thinking, is Jesus okay? Because this isn't new. This is what he's been saying for a long time. I don't get it. But that's when Jesus does something. And you got to get this. Okay, this is where your categories are going to get smashed. This is where following Jesus gets really hard, but it also gets really beautiful. Is that Jesus takes what used to be the standard and he elevates it to something different. Look what he says. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. And this had never been heard before. Yeah, Jesus, I get it. Like eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, quid pro quo. If they treat you like okay, then you should treat them okay. If you would like, somebody to, open the door for you, you should open the door for them. If you're, at Disney Springs and it's a, Thursday night and it's around the holidays, or you're at the mall and you're trying to get into a parking spot at Target and you see somebody who needs to find, you guys arrive at the same time, and you have this like kind of cat and mouse moment, and you remember you've got a No to Church bumper sticker on your car. You let them park. Like I get it. That's what I'm supposed to do. I'll treat other people the way I would want to treat them. And Jesus is like, no. That is not the way of Jesus. Do you know that Buddhism and Baha'ism and Hinduism and Islam and Judaism, do you know that all of those religions have a golden rule? That it's not unique to Christianity to say you ought to treat people the way that you want to be treated. Jesus introduces not the golden rule, but the platinum rule. The bling bling rule, all right, as I like to call it. Treat others, write this down. Treat others the way that Jesus treats you. That the love of a follower of Jesus, it's not about treating people the way you want to be treated. It's about treating people the way that Jesus would treat them if he was right there in front of them. And that is so much harder than following a list of rules and regulations that I can find loopholes with, is it not? Because all of a sudden, when I begin to think about people the way that Jesus thinks about people, I realize that sometimes the way that I want somebody to treat me isn't the way that Jesus treats me. Jesus, he treats me better. You've ever found yourself in a position where you did something dumb and you felt so bad about it and you felt like, I deserve this punishment? You ever been there before? Yeah, Jesus doesn't treat us like that. Jesus says, yeah, you do deserve the punishment, but I'm not going to treat you like you deserve the punishment. I'm going to treat you. I'm going to treat you different. I'm going to treat you better. Which begs this question. What is Jesus' love like? I think there's a million ways to think about it. But I think one of the ways to think about it is this, is that Jesus' love is intentional. That from the beginning of time, Jesus has been pursuing me and he's been pursuing you. And he's been setting up relationships and moments and conversations and people in your life. He's been doing all of these different things to tangibly show you. I mean, he's been throwing the kitchen sink at your soul to let you know that he's for you, not against you, that he's on your side. That's how Jesus' love is. Jesus' love it's incarnational. And incarnational is a fancy word for present and relational. But you'll notice that there are going to be 3 I's here, and I'm committed to the I more than I am clarity. So here we go. You can write incarnational, or you can write relational if you like. But Jesus is present. That God comes with skin and flesh, and he comes to earth, and he walks among us. That our God's not a God who's distant and far away and removed and thinking, oh, that's too nasty, that's too disgusting, that isn't good enough. I don't know if I can interact with that. Jesus doesn't put one foot in, one foot out. He doesn't step over the ledge, long, blonde, flowing hair, saying, when you've got everything figured out, come up to me. That's not what he does, right? He jumps into the mess. All of the grime. That's the way of Jesus. It's his love. It's present. His love is eye to eye with you. It's face to face with you. It's heart to heart with you. It's soul to soul with you. It's close. That's the love of Jesus. Jesus' love is not only intentional and incarnational, but it's also irrational. You ever thought that it makes no sense for Jesus to love us the way that he loves us? I mean, think about this. Jesus is going to die on a cross for crimes he did not commit in a couple of chapters, knowing that there are going to be people that hundreds or thousands of years later are going to willingly and willfully desire to hate him and scorn him and mock him and make fun of him. Jesus knows that as he's hanging on the cross and people say, hey, if you are who you say you are, why don't you just come down from that tree? He knows that he can, and he can do it at any moment. I mean, the guy walked on water. He took a couple fish and loaves and fed thousands of people. He's going to levitate in a couple of chapters and do a Chris Angel thing and go back to heaven. I mean, he can do whatever he wants to do whenever he wants to do it, and yet he's willing to pour himself out for me and for you. It's irrational, isn't it? Rational looks like scoping the situation and scenario, finding the people that are most likely going to have the most potential, and then adding them onto their team, right? It's like if this were a dodgeball game, the rational move by Jesus would be like, let me go find the most smart, powerful, educated people and put them on my team. And instead, he's like, oh, a fisherman who's not educated, cool, you come. A tax collector who everybody hates, great, come on. Women who are disillusioned and disenfranchised and not allowed to even have a voice in community, why don't you come and follow me too? Let me make sure that the first person who sees me resurrected is not a man who's in legal times, whose voice is the only one that can be held up in a court of law. Let me have a woman be the first one to see me. That's how Jesus does what he does. Does any of that make rational sense? No. It's like the story of the son who goes to his dad and he says, Dad, I don't love you anymore. I want my money now. And then the son disrespects his dad, takes all of his stuff, leaves home, spends all of it, lives a reckless life, becomes dirt poor, and decides to move back into dad's basement. Dad doesn't sit on the porch, arms crossed, thinking he's learned his lesson, good for him. Going to have him work his way back in, going to have him pay rent at the house, going to make sure that he knows where he is, going to make sure he learns his lesson. No, the father runs with abandon, reckless abandon. Reckless abandon. It's irrational, and it makes no sense. And this is the love that Jesus says is expected of anyone who says that they follow him. He says, a new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. And then he says this, by this, everyone will know. By this, irrational, irresponsible, indescribable, absurd, generous love. Everyone will know that you are my disciples. If you love one another. And this is the new ethic. This is the new standard. This is the Jesus way of living. It's more than shoulds and should nots, do's and don'ts, rules and regulations. Take all of that stuff and throw it to the side for a minute, because that is easy. That is religion, but it is not the invitation to every single one of us to follow Jesus. Because here's what we'll find in John 13 that will mess with our political categories, mess with our relational categories, mess with every aspect of our life. You can write this down. That your love for the you beside you, your love for the you beside you is the truest indicator that you're following Jesus. It's not what you know. And it's not what you are doing or not doing. It's not how good you're keeping the shoulds and the should nots. The most clear indicator that you are a follower of Jesus is your love for the you beside you. So if you're a Democrat, it's the you to the right of you. If you're a Republican, it's the you to the left of you. You see what I just did there? That was brilliant. If you're rich, it's the you that you don't think you can relate to. If you're white, it's the you that doesn't look like you. If you're an American citizen, it's the you that you don't understand. If you're a follower of Jesus, it's the you that doesn't believe like you. The truest indicator of following Jesus is not how much Bible you know. It's not how moral and good you are at keeping rules. The truest indicator, the hardest part of being a follower of Jesus is how you love the you beside you. This is what Jesus says. This is what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 25. And I want you to just sit back and listen to these words and let them mess with you. And I hope you walk out of here not knowing what to do with more questions than answers, because that, I think, is in some ways what it means to be a follower of Jesus. These are the words of Jesus, not mine. But look at what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 25. He says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, meaning when Jesus shows up, when he comes back, it's the final storyline. It's done. He's back. He's arrived. And all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. Now let's stop there for a minute. To set the scene, for those of us that are followers of Jesus, for those of you who are not followers of Jesus, or you are unsure about what it means to be a follower of Jesus, or you are so done with religion and so done with rules, it's just a miracle you're even in the room right now. And we talk about heaven all the time as Christians because we believe in eternity. We believe that there's a forever future for those of us that walk with God, yes, and for those of us who don't. This is the picture that Jesus is painting about what it's going to be like when he comes home. This is the picture that Jesus paints about what it's going to be like when he looks at all of humanity that's ever existed, the billions and billions of people that have walked this planet, and they all gather together, and he's going to separate them right from left, the ones that are in, the ones that are out, the ones that are going to be with him forever, the ones that are not. This is the magnificent, big, huge story. And before we get to these words and before they come on the screen, I want you to see what's going on here, is that Jesus is doing what he said he would do. He's doing what he said he would do, which is that there will be some that he knows and will be with him forever, and there are some that he does not know and that will be separated from him forever. And you would expect, if you're anything like me and you grew up in the religious home that I grew up in and in the background that I grew up in and what I kind of experienced, right? This is just what most of us experience. You would expect that the next words following these verses are going to be, those of you who showed up on time to church. Like, that's none of us. Those of you who made sure you waited until you were married before you had sex. Those of you who made sure that you cut your tithe check and gave 10% every week. Those of you who chose not to become a raging alcoholic. Those of you stayed faithful to your spouse. All of these things, incredibly important, incredibly valuable, and incredibly essential to experience the life of flourishing that God has intended for you. That's what you would expect to be the next words. But these are Jesus' words, not mine. And let them mess with your head. This is what he says. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger. That word stranger means foreigner. You invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. And I'm sure all of the people in that moment are going to be thinking, Jesus, I was in 2018. You lived in the first century. I never saw you hungry. I never saw you thirsty. Jesus, how could you ever be in prison? You never sinned before. I'm getting really confused right now. How does that work? Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, look at the word. When did we, look at this word. Just think about this word. When did we see you hungry and feed you? Or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger, invite you in? Or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison? And Jesus, our King, my King, for many of us in the room, your King, your Savior, will reply, truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. That when I see somebody hungry, I see somebody thirsty, I see somebody under-resourced, and I step in and I become an answer to their prayer, it's like I'm doing it for Jesus. That when I see somebody who's a stranger and unsure of the situation, or when somebody walks into church for the first time, or walks into the office for the first time, or moves into the neighborhood, and I go across whatever cultural barrier I need to go to, I step outside of my comfort zone, and I embrace them with the arms of welcome. I'm not just embracing them, I'm embracing the Jesus image in them. And that when I see people that I don't get or don't understand or are locked up or are in a different situation, and I choose to believe the best about them and serve them and make a difference in their life, that I'm loving the Jesus in them. Is that not way harder than keeping a list of rules? Is that not way tougher than having a bunch of boxes to check? Does that not feel way more uncomfortable than simply doing the bare minimum? The answer is yes. But Jesus' invitation to us is not an invitation to law. It's an invitation to love. And this is what the followers of Jesus in the first century understood. This is what allowed the first century church to survive Roman persecution. It's what allowed the first century church to make it through racial and financial and political hatred. It's what allowed this little group of 120 people in a little house in an upstairs back room of a town in Jerusalem to have the courage to step out and begin to bring a message that would transform a city of Jerusalem. It's why thousands of people who had been Jewish their whole life and believed in Jewish religion, in a matter of a few minutes, when Peter stands up and says, "You killed him, he rose, say you're sorry," became followers of Jesus in that moment. It's what allowed our faith and the people that we love and we think about to march into the Colosseum in Rome and be ripped from limb to limb, proclaiming Jesus is resurrected. It's what allowed the church to walk in to places like Roman cities where plagues would hit, and while everyone else was running for the hills, the Christians would step right in and take care of the sickest of the sick, not worried if they died, because they knew that life was temporary and that God was good and that people needed love no matter what. And it's why little girls who were left out in the Roman countryside to be exposed to the elements to be killed because women meant nothing in the first century in Rome would be collected up and rounded up by committees of Christians who would bring these little kids who had no families into their home, even if it cost them everything. And that was a faith that was tough as nails. That was a faith that could endure the Roman persecution. And that is a faith that you and I have inherited. A faith of irrational, irresistible, incredible love. Imagine if your family looked like that. Imagine if the question asked at your home was the platinum question. How would Jesus treat my spouse? How would Jesus treat my kids? How would Jesus treat the person who doesn't look like me, think like me, or act like me? How would Jesus treat them? Because that is the invitation to the follower of Jesus. And imagine if people, listen to this, who don't believe what you believe have to reconsider what they believe because of how well you love the you beside you. That people that want nothing to do with church would have to reconsider church because the church was so much of an asset to the community it was a part of. That people that do not believe in a resurrected Jesus would have to reconsider that message because their neighbors love them so well. Because everywhere there is need, that's where the Christians are. And they love better. And they don't give the scraps of what they've got. They've got the best of what they've got. That's how the first century church rewrote history. And that's how we can write our story in Lake Nona. So here's the platinum question. You can go ahead and put it up on the screen. The platinum question. Am I seeing and treating this person, whoever it might be, the way Jesus wants them to be seen and treated? Imagine if this was your starting point, if this was my starting point for every interaction we had with people. Am I seeing and treating this person the way Jesus wants them to be seen and treated? Because love, listen to this, is how followers of Jesus change history. And it's how we will make history in Lake Nona. So to those of you who give, to those of you who serve, and to those of you who love like this, thank you. Thank you for being that kind of church. And thank you for being that kind of people. A people who do not simply say, let me settle for the golden rule. The golden rule is religion. It's old hat. It's not unique. Everybody can do it. It's everybody's expectation. But thank you for not just being a golden rule church, but a platinum rule church that asks the platinum question. How do we see and treat every person, every single one, the way that Jesus would see and treat them? So here's my challenge to you as we wrap up this series. The giving piece, that might be the easiest part in this whole thing. The serving piece may be a little bit tougher because it involves time, but the love piece, that's what changes the city. That's what changes the community. That's what changes your home. And if I may be so bold, it's what changed you. It's that Jesus didn't see you and treat you the way you wanted to be treated. Jesus saw you and treated you the way he knew you needed to be treated. With an irrational, unending, forever kind of love. So let's be that people and that kind of church for our city today. Would you stand with me as we pray?